Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Walter Cronin was 16 years old when he graduated from high school. But as you will find out, Colonel Cronin was on the fast track just about all his life. Certainly during a distinguished military career that spanned 27 years, a career that sent him to service not only in the United States, but to Japan, Korea, Paris, London, and Vietnam. He kept up with World War II as a schoolboy, joined the Merchant Marines, and then the Army in 1946. He was coming into military service just as the fighting was wrapping up in the Pacific, but it's an intriguing story of service. And we're proud to have Colonel Walter J. Cronin, Jr. as our guest on Veterans of the Valley. Walter, it is indeed a pleasure to have you. You really did take the fast track. 16 years old, you graduated from high school. By the time you were 17 years old, you were already a buck sergeant in the Army, and you just got promoted from there. So at that time, with World War II ending, going into the Korean conflict, a lot of people were getting out of service, so they needed young men, and they advanced them fast, and you were kind of part of that, weren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right there, Johnny on the spot.
Indeed. Talk about sort of what, first your service in the Merchant Marines, and then into the active Army, and then the Army Reserves, and then how it moved on from there.
Well, my service in the Merchant Marine was very short, and because I couldn't join the Army until I was 17.
Right.
So at 16, I went into the Maritime Service, actually, and went through the training facility at Sheepshead Bay, New York, where they train Russian seamen to man the merchant fleet. And of course, the merchant fleet was still quite large at the end of the war. They started decommissioning the ships, and I was on a training ship. When I graduated, they offered me a job on the training ship as an instructor at 16 years old. And we had men 16 to 60, so it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
You were a young guy, and I guess some of the older people, did they resent this young guy coming in and moving up so fast?
They weren't too happy about it. But nonetheless, when I got out of the Merchant Marine, I left the Merchant Marine because they decommissioned the ship I was on. Right. And I went back to Washington, which was close to my home. Yeah. And saw a billboard that said, "Join the Army." So I went down and joined the Army at 17. By that time, I had turned 17.
Right.
And so I went off to basic training, and it just kept on going. But I went in through basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, in September of '46. Right. And because all the troops were coming home from overseas, the Army was in dire need of troops to fill the vacancies of those that were coming home from overseas. Right. And so they reduced the provisions for enlistment in the Army from like the 3 or 4 year term normal down to 18 months. So they got quite an influx of young men who were caught between ages like myself, right, where you couldn't go to college because I couldn't. No university would accept you because you had to be a veteran. Well, the only way you get to be a veteran was to go and get and be one. So I opted to go into the Army, and almost immediately they curtailed the basic training and shipped us to Japan in December of 1946. Right. I arrived in Japan.
Right. This is actually before the surrender had actually been signed. So you were in Japan. The fighting had stopped, but the surrender hadn't happened right yet.
The full peace treaty had not been signed at all. The surrender had already taken place. The fighting, the formal aspects of that had stopped, but the war was still technically on.
Exactly. Your 20th birthday, you were actually promoted to Master Sergeant. You were in, I believe, Washington, D.C. at the time. What was your early job there in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I had quite a few different jobs. I was moved from one to the other and got promoted very rapidly from Staff Sergeant to Master Sergeant, which at that time was as high as you could go, E7. And my job at the time was, I was like an administrative assistant, sort of like a sergeant major for the Washington, D.C. District of Columbia Military District, which was the office and headquarters responsible for the training, the supervision, the coordination, the input, and the National Guard and the Army Reserve. So I worked for who was the chief of that district, who was a full colonel by the name of Stuart Yo. Right. And one day I was going through all the papers, the new regulations that the Department of the Army puts out regularly, and saw where you could become a commissioned officer if you had served in any of the first 3 enlisted grades during the time of war.
Right.
And technically I had, so I applied for it, went before Board of Officers at the Pentagon, and was fortunate enough to be selected. So
Right.
very quickly I became a second lieutenant.
And took a pay cut, right?
Took a $13 a month pay cut, and that almost killed me.
That was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money in those days.
All right. You went on to Fort Benning, and then the Korean War broke out. I think that you said that you were on the rocket launcher range when word got to you that you were headed to Korea. I bet you remember that.
I remember it very vividly. I was training troops in the use of the firearm so that they would know how to use the anti-tech weapon, the rocket launcher. When the Jeep came out to tell me that I'd just been ordered to Korea, so to report back to headquarters.
This was 1951, and you were in Korea 30 days and got another promotion. That was kind of automatic to first lieutenant. Let's talk about Korea. Talk about your experience there. You were a ground soldier in Korea, and it was during this time in Korea, this year or so in Korea, that you earned the Bronze Star Medal. Talk about your time in Korea, what your job was, what you did, and the events that led up to your action that got you the Bronze Star Medal.
Well, and when I went to Korea, all the U.S. forces were critically short on personnel. And they had filled up the units with Koreans. They called them Katusas. They were Korean Army trainees that were just automatically drafted from off the street in Korea and put into the armed forces to build our force structure up to strength. And we trained them. I had an interpreter. We called all of our interpreters, we gave them all female names. All of the Korean soldiers, we named Rosemary. My interpreter was named Rosemary, and he didn't mind. He didn't really know, I don't think, what was going on. But anyhow, I was assigned, after I went through the Repel Depots and all in Seoul. The fighting was just north of Seoul at that time, below the 38th parallel, right up there close to it. As a matter of fact, the 38th parallel was reasonably well established at that time. And I was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, to the 7th Infantry Regiment, to Company H. And H Company is one of the lettered companies, of course, and it's a heavy weapons company.
Yes, sir.
It is, at that time, it was structured, I don't know how it is today, but I was in charge of the 81 millimeter mortar platoon, and at that time we were very short on second lieutenants. So I also had the 75 millimeter recoilless rifles and the heavy machine gun platoon. And we went right up on the line right away to move in to hold. There was a salient in the peace talks at the time that went up and over and up in the furthermost corner to the northeast there, northwest. That was the high ground that controlled all of the valleys and one of the major approach routes to retake the city of Seoul.
Right.
And the British were holding that position, and they were kicked off the hill every night. The Chinese army came in and threw them off the hill, and then they had to go back and take it back every morning. But because they kept losing it, it was in dispute as to who actually owned it. And it was a dominant piece of terrain. I won't tell you how we named it, how the GIs nicknamed it, but nonetheless, it was too prominent.
Old veterans will know. You just say you named it Dagmar, and old veterans will know why you named it
was named Dagmar.
Because of the shape of the hill.
Two prominent hills together.
Go
yes.
ahead.
And it was all rock up there. So when they moved us in there, we moved in the wee hours of the morning, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. We relieved the British, and as the British major that had his mortar platoon in the same position where we put ours, said to me, "I say, old chap, mine's now at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Beware." Well, boy, it started. And everybody was amazed at what happened, because we had no idea that the Chinese could accumulate so much artillery and fire, and manage to fire it all in such a short period of time. And I've never read the official report, and I certainly didn't count the rounds, but we were shelled at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and they shelled us for 24 hours. And it was supposed to have been like 116,000 rounds.
Wow.
That came into that sector. Well, there wasn't much left. I mean, it wasn't torn up. The trees were all totally destroyed. It was just a mess. And we're running low on ammunition until we did run out of that usable ammunition, because some of it was not, the trajectory on the mortars, they were like phosphorus rounds, were not strong enough to project that big projectile far enough out to make sure it cleared all of our own troops. Mm-hmm. So we didn't use those rounds. And I couldn't raise anybody on any of the radio communications, and I made the decision to redeploy back to the ammunition dump where there was plenty of ammunition, so we could fight all day or all night for 2 or 3 days without running low even. Mm-hmm. And so I moved half of my men back there, and the other half I took back later. We moved in phases. In the meantime, the troops that were being kicked off the hill, the Chinese attacked in force. They hit us with somewhere in the neighborhood of several divisions, which just was overwhelming, because that's why the troops were low on ammunition. We were running very short because they kept coming wave after wave of soldiers. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I picked up those that had come off the hill because they didn't know where else to go. And I kept them in, and we surrounded the ammo dump, made a perimeter defense around it, and kept it until we were passed through a couple of nights later to reinforce and go back and retake the hill. Then we kept it at that point after.
Right. In the citation, which Colonel Cronin was awarded the Bronze Star Medal, it said Colonel Cronin's aggressive leadership in combat was highly instrumental in the overall success of the unit's mission during the battle for Hill 355 near Kawao-san, Korea. He assembled and reorganized all personnel in his immediate vicinity who had become separated from their respective units and led them to a point of safety. That's just part of the citation that you were awarded the Bronze Star Medal. Indeed, it's obviously an event, especially that 24 hours, that certainly will be embedded in your memory forever.
Yes, for certain.
But you were a lucky soldier. You came out personally unscathed then, and then later in Vietnam also. And I know that you count yourself as very blessed and very fortunate for that.
Absolutely blessed.
Right. You spent about 12 months in Korea, and then from there, talk about. You came back home for a while. Talk about that. You went to flight. You thought you wanted to go to flight school. You went, but you decided that was the wrong decision, right?
Absolutely wrong.
Didn't like
decision.
that at all.
No, it was not my cup of tea. Mm-hmm. First place, I didn't really want to be a chauffeur. Right. And in the Army at the time, we had more aircraft than the Air Force, but mostly they were helicopters and the small, light, fixed-wing observation aircraft. Mm-hmm. And after I learned to fly the L-19, which I did, I decided I didn't want to pursue that as a career because you spend all your time hauling other colonels and everybody around, and I'd rather be the colonel riding around than the guy driving the plane.
Right. This is a good time to pause now, and let's go to some photographs that Colonel Cronin has supplied us. These are photographs from his own collection, and pictures of him and that time. So let's go ahead and go to the first one. This is a marvelous picture that I was able to scan, and you were about, what, 16 or 17 years old in that picture?
I was 17.
17 years old. A young, raw guy just eager to go, right?
That's right, raring to go.
There you are. There you are. Okay, let's move on. There's another photograph. I guess, is this about the same time? You a little bit older there?
Yes, I was 18 then.
You were 18.
So I had managed to attain 2 stripes there in the interim.
Right. So you were a corporal about to be a buck sergeant, I guess. Right. Or is that buck sergeant there?
No, that's corporal.
That's corporal.
That's a technical corporal.
A technical corporal, thus the T. Okay, let's move on from there. Where was this picture taken, do you recall?
That was taken in the city of Beppu in Japan, in the island of Kyushu, down at the home of the 19th Infantry Regiment, in front of one of the local homes there in Beppu.
Right, right.
And that was also taken around 1946 or so.
Talk about this picture. I take it that you're in this picture. What is this group?
This is when I was a member of the 317th Glider Infantry Regiment, which was a reserve regiment, and it was one of the last glider infantry units in the Army. It was just before they phased them out. As you probably are aware, the glider didn't prove to be operationally such a successful weapon in the offense, in the attack, because they put spikes up and destroyed most of their gliders. But this was the same unit, and it was basically a unit from stationed in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Move on to the next picture. What's this? That's you on the left.
Oh, that's my promotion to captain. And I was stationed in the Minnesota Military District at the time.
And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Okay. And a little bit older, I guess this is closer to your retirement time, right?
It's much closer to retirement time.
We did age you a little bit right there, just real quickly.
I was probably 43 years old then.
And this is from a newsletter that you have. This was actually at the time that you retired, I think, in 1973.
That's correct, the 30th of June.
Okay. Now I wanted to include this. This is the cover of the notebook where you keep a lot of your memorabilia from your service, and I was just intrigued by this cover. It's hand painted, and talk a little bit about the cover of this notebook and who made it for you and how it came about.
Well, when I was in the Beppu in the 19th Regiment, they pulled me up to the regimental headquarters to work up there. And one of my additional duties working was using the Japanese labor there to maintain the headquarters building. And there were 6 different Japanese citizens. And every night we would meet together in the conference room, and I would teach them English as they would teach me Japanese. Mm-hmm. And I'd buy them PX crackers or something and peanut butter. And we didn't have a lot to eat in those days. The PX wasn't very full of anything, so right. That's how they gave me that as a presento when I left.
That was wonderful. That really was. We talked about a little bit about after Korea. I want you to talk about your time in Minnesota. You were promoted to captain in Minnesota, the military district there, as an intelligence officer, and you told me about specifically one event during the I guess the McCarthy hearings where. In regard to a soldier, and this soldier's parents who were suspected of being communists, and sort of a contentious situation you had with then Senator Hubert Humphrey. Talk about that and how that came to be and what happened there.
Well, this soldier had lied and took an oath that was false. Mm-hmm. And when they discovered all of that in his personnel investigation, and he was a helicopter maintenance man. Right. And he had lied about his parents' association with the Communist Party. His mother was the regional director of Region 5, and his father was the lead general director of Region 5 of the Communist Party. And as a result of lying, they separated from the service without a discharge, without excuse me, determining a type of discharge. Mm-hmm. So what he came out of was with a discharge, a type to be determined. And as the intelligence officer in the command, I was given the job with my boss that was promoting me there to convene a board of officers to determine what type of discharge he should be given for his service based on the distortions of the truth and the lack of accuracy in his oath. Right. And in the process, then the Senator McCarthy, Senator Humphrey mm-hmm. Came to see me at the headquarters and demanded that I brief him in detail on what was going on. Well, of course, what was going on was classified. All the information involved in it was classified. So I had to respectfully remind the senator that the U.S. Army had a congressional liaison officer in Capitol Hill, and they would be happy to entertain any and all of his questions and do their best to answer them to his satisfaction. But I was unable to, or not permitted to discuss it with him. And it ended up being highly publicized, because it was a local boy right. in Minneapolis, right. and so there was a lot of publicity. Television
standing up to the powerful senator.
And he was going on the television and ranting and raving that he wouldn't be told about locally what was going on. So I couldn't help it. I was doing what I was told to do.
Another great memory. I know that a lot of schooling, both regular schooling and Army schooling, and going back and forth, but then eventually the Vietnam War broke out. I want to make sure that we get to that and what your duties were at Vietnam. You were part of the U.S. Military Assistance Command. Talk about what that was and what that involved in Vietnam.
Well, that was the general headquarters for the Joint Staff that operated all of the armed forces that were in Vietnam. And at that time, the time that I was there, General Westmoreland was the Comus McPhee, the commanding officer of Military Assistance Command Vietnam. And I worked in the headquarters in the Intelligence Collection Division,
Right.
so that we functioned to do all the tasking for the intelligence requirements that the Army staff or the Joint Staff needed in order to do their job, to keep the commander informed every day as to all the current events that were taking place in country, and where the enemy forces were, what strength, and what they were about to do, and so forth. And every morning we attended a general staff meeting. It was a classified meeting, and we would go over what had happened with the general staff, all the generals, the commanding general of the intelligence and personnel and all of it. Mm-hmm. And they'd bring up the General Westmoreland up to date on operationally what had occurred in the last 24 hours, or more frequently if he wanted a briefing more often. And we were all detailed to go, because I went with my boss and sat right beside him, and if anything came our way, I would immediately go back and prepare the orders and task the forces in country to respond in kind, to collect the intelligence that was necessary in order to give him the information to make his decisions on where and when the troops were going to do whatever they were going to do.
Right.
And also I was the assistant, I was designated as a special liaison officer for all the foreign military attaches from the other countries that were attaches accredited to the South Vietnamese government.
I see.
And I functioned as an additional duty as the Army attaché.
You had been promoted to a major in 1962 after coming back from Vietnam, promoted to lieutenant colonel and then to colonel before you retired. After Vietnam, you went to Norfolk and then back to Washington again. Finally retired from Fort Holabird in Maryland. So that sort of goes through your military career. We've only got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I want to talk about after your military career because it's fascinating. You were on the East Coast and in that area, and you became a nurseryman. Talk a little bit about your career after the armed forces.
Well, I spent 10 years in the nursery business with my son-in-law, and the nursery has grown. Right now, it's one of the largest in the country of its kind.
What's the name of it? I'll let you plug it.
Homestead Gardens.
Okay.
And it's in Davidsonville, Maryland. It's 11 miles from the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And we started out with one greenhouse. Right now, the largest greenhouse there covers, one house covers 5 full acres of land. It's all with radiant heat and everything. It's a state-of-the-art facility. It continues to grow unbelievably fast and dynamic, and we had over 2,200 greenhouses at one time, and I'm sure now with this big one they don't need all that many.
Right.
But it has grown and been very successful.
Wow, it was a wonderful career. Your wife Joan, I know, is in the studio with us today, and she is a proud horse person. I don't know the exact
that's
person.
fine.
She rides with the Texas Ladies Aside. I know an organization that I'm somewhat familiar with. I was able to come out to your home earlier this week, and just some beautiful animals that you all raised there at your property near Welborn. I know that that's a thrill for both of you.
It is indeed. And Joanne is a marvelous rider, and she does a great job. She just completed participating in the Houston Rodeo, and her group appeared before over 500,000 people during the time of the rodeo.
Yes, yeah. And you have a hobby. Go upstairs in your house and you fix clocks. You fix grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks. You go up there and there's clock parts everywhere.
Yeah,
that's one of your other hobbies, right?
That's true. I'm going back this afternoon. I'm going back to Houston and take another course.
Your service in the military, 27 years. Sort of wrap it up. What do you, when you think back to your service, what are your own personal thoughts?
Well, I feel mightily blessed.
Yes,
in many, many ways. Number one, I lived through it all,
Mm-hmm.
and I've lived to collect quite a fine retirement from the age of 44 down, and I'm 77.
Right.
And I've been free pretty much to do as I please since that time. But my military service was extremely rewarding. The finest job I had in the Army actually was as a rifle company commander.
Right, you told me that.
And because when you're a rifle company commander, you have command of your men. You own them literally, night, and you have them 24 hours a day. There's about 200. It varied with full number because we were never full strength very long.
Right.
And you take that group of men and work with them night and day and develop them and professionally to work as a competent force element to accomplish a mission. And it reflects to no small extent the men do. Your drive, your enthusiasm, your leadership is reflected in everything they do in their attitude and what they accomplish in the manner in which they do so.
You like being around troops. You like being around
Absolutely.
people. That's why you didn't like the flying business, and you liked.
Absolutely. I
Exactly.
liked it after all the time being with the men.
Right.
It's a challenge always, and always very rewarding. And some of the instances were pretty sad on many occasions,
Yes,
but not that many, mostly very pleasant memories. And I had some wonderful experiences. I got to go to Europe first class on the United States luxury liner as a captain.
That's great. Thank you for your service. We're out of time, but I appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Colonel Walter Cronin can recount those years between 1946 and 1973 with amazing clarity, as you see. He is rightly proud of his military service, his civilian career as a nurseryman, and his retirement with his wife, Joan, in rural Brazos County near Welborn. We salute and thank Colonel Walter Cronin for his service, as we thank all veterans. And we thank our underwriter, First National Bank. To read more stories of local veterans, read Brazos Valley Heroes each Sunday in the Eagle. I'm Tom Turbeville. For Colonel Walter Cronin, we'll see you next time on Veterans of the Valley.